Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our CEBU training session, taking the pulse of your county economy. My name is Jim Nelson. I'm your moderator. I'm the business editor of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel and a journalism instructor at Marquette University, and proud to be a member of the CEBU board. We'd like to, this webinar is free to business journalists as part of virtual data training sessions supported by the Walter and Carla Goldschmidt Foundation. And we'd like to thank them for their support of CEBU. And I'd also like to take a quick second to thank Renee McGivern, Tess McLaughlin, and of CEBU, and Kathleen Graham, CEBU Executive Director, for all the work they do to make programs like this available. Couple preliminary things. In the chat section, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions with about 15 minutes remaining, so in about 45 minutes from now. Also, and I'll remind you toward the end, we'd like you to use the chat function at the conclusion of our program to give us some feedback. How useful was the program? You can rate it on a scale of 1 to 5. You can use a how useful you found it, and you know, semi-useful, really useful, awesome. But if you use that, that would give us some feedback. We're just starting to do these kinds of training sessions, so we'd really like to hear from how it worked out for you, because we think you're going to become better informed and come up with great story ideas from our panel of experts. So let me start with our panel of experts. I want to introduce, first of all, Janine Aversa from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And I'm going to ask each of our participants, each of our panelists, to just say a few words. But first of all, Janine is the Chief Public Affairs Officer and Outreach staff for the BEA. Second panel member is Thomas Dale, Public Affairs Specialist for the BEA. And finally, join us is James Medore from Newsday. For those of you who know James, James covers the economy for Newsday. And he's a longtime CEBU board member and a fine journalist. So by way of introduction, Janine, why don't you just give us a little bit of background about yourself, a few words of introduction, and then we'll kick it over to Thomas and then James.
Thanks, Jim. I want to first off thank everyone for joining today, taking the time out of your busy day to be part of this session, and also thank you very much for including BEA. As Jim mentioned, I am Chief of Public Affairs at BEA, and I joined in September 2011, and that was my first job outside of journalism. So my whole career before that, which was decades and decades, I worked as a journalist at a number of news organizations, including Bloomberg and the Associated Press. And in, I guess, the last 10 to 15 years of my journalism career, I was exclusively covering economics and politics and everything in between. So it's, I would say, you know, covering economics, it's a broad and wonderful canvas to report from. And that's a little bit about me, and I'll turn it over to the next person.
Hi, thanks, Janine. This is Thomas Dale. I am also a public affairs specialist at the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Been there since 2004. Before that, I worked as a local journalist and actually used BEA's local data in my reporting. So I'm really excited to join you all and tell you a little bit about all the data that we have that can help inform your reporting. James?
Thank you, Thomas. I think Thomas and Janine just pointed out why they're such helpful resources to journalists. They understand what we're doing because they walk the walk for so many years. I cover the economy for Newsday. Right now, like most business journalists, I'm covering COVID-19, and specifically, I'm covering the small business economy and the trials and tribulations of small businesses, because more than 96% of Long Island businesses have less than 20 employees. So that's sort of where our economy is. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion, and thank you for the invitation.
Thanks all. One thing I'll just point out is here's a prime example of how our government can help us as journalists do our work better, because at the base, the GDP forms so much of our economic analysis and tells us so much about what's going on. So I'll throw it to Janine and let her walk us through, and then throw it over to Thomas so we can learn how to find very important and some of this really granular data that they provide to us.
Thanks a lot, Jim. First, a little bit about BEA. We are part of the U.S. Commerce Department, and we are all civil servants at BEA. There are no political appointees. You probably know us best by our national statistics: GDP, consumer spending, business investment, and international trade. We could go on and on. But we have a treasure trove of state, metro, and county statistics. And our newest is going to be featured in depth by my colleague Thomas Dale, and that's county GDP. So not that long ago, BEA launched a project to measure the GDP of all 3,000 plus counties in the United States. That also includes county equivalents like parishes and boroughs. So the data that we have is most recent as of 2018, but we do have a time series that goes back, so you can do some analysis and you can look at what's going on in great detail. Importantly, in our county GDP data, but it's also in our state data and our metro data, we have detail by industry. And that is really important for you when you're doing your reporting, because you can look at your county GDP, but then you can look at all the industries under it, and you can see which industries are supporting growth, which industries are restraining growth. And that can really help you inform your where your reporting goes and questions and things like that. Our county GDP data, as I said, the most recent data that we have available, it's annual, is for 2018, and we'll have data for 2019. It will be publicly released in early December, December 9th, to be exact. Before I move on, I just want to introduce again my colleague Thomas Dale. As he mentioned, he's a former reporter, so he understands the how to use data in telling stories and how to use it accurately. Thomas has a lot of talents, but I will single out one of them, and that's his ability to find even the most obscure data point in BEA's massive database. I mean, we have millions and millions and millions of points of data. So you will want to memorize his contact information. Spoiler alert, he does have it included in the presentation, so you actually won't have to memorize it. You can just take it down. And with that, I want to turn it over to Thomas.
Well, thank you very much, Janine. So as Janine mentioned, today we're going to be talking in great detail about all of our county GDP data. But I'm going to also talk a little bit about some other local data that can also be really useful to help you in your reporting. But before I do, I want to just touch really briefly on something that's a little bit confusing about the U.S. Economic statistical system, and that's that the data that you want may not be coming from BEA. It may come from the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Census Bureau. And so I put together, or we've put together a kind of a handy dandy chart that looks through some of the key economic data sources and which particular agency of the three produces those. So, everything from the economic census, which comes from the Census Bureau, CPI comes from our colleagues at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, GDP and corporate profits, obviously, that's going to be from BEA. But we also have GDP by industry and GDP by state and metro area. Median family income, that's coming from the Census Bureau, but we have a different measure called personal income that I'll talk to you about in detail a little bit later. Personal consumption expenditures is just a fancy word for consumer spending. And then we've got a lot of state and local personal income data as well. As unemployment, tomorrow morning, our colleagues at the Bureau of Labor Statistics are going to be releasing their monthly employment situation at the national level. And that's one that, gets a lot of attention. And then to make things even more confusing, the trade and goods and services data are actually jointly released by the Bureau of Economic Analysis and our colleagues at the Census Bureau. The division of labor here is that Census is compiling all the goods data, BEA is compiling the services data. With that out of the way, want to talk to you a little bit about gross domestic product and what it actually is. GDP is the total market value of all the goods and services that are produced within the US in a given year. A good is going to be something tangible, like a Big Mac or a piece of jewelry, a piece of clothing. A service is going to be something like a haircut or a bus ride, or doctor's care. And then the market value is how much something costs actually in the marketplace. It's the price you actually pay for something. So what good is GDP? Well, I think James alluded to this earlier, but gross domestic product is great because it's the broadest measure of economic activity in our area. And what can you do with those numbers? Well, how fast is the economy growing? That's going to be the GDP data. You can also look at GDP at the state level and see how your state stacks up against others. And then what industries are contributing to growth and which industries are actually slowing it down or restraining it. BEA produces GDP estimates for at the national level, both quarterly and annually. We produce it for the 50 states in DC, so GDP at the state level. We also produce quarterly. For counties and metro areas, we do that just once a year. And then for industries, we have quarterly data. And then finally, for US territories, we have annual data. So what does GDP mean for readers in your community? And here we're specifically going to be talking about our county and metro area GDP statistics. Well, you can analyze state and local economic impacts of national or state economic trends. There may be some national economic story that's being well reported in the large national press and the Wall Street Journal. But how is that playing out in your community? Is your community being affected by that, or is your community sort of insulated? When I was a reporter, one of the places where I worked was a military area, Jacksonville, North Carolina, which has a large Marine Corps base. And that economy largely was insulated from a lot of the ups and downs of the national economy, because so much of the economic activity in that county was tied to military spending, which didn't fluctuate so much with national economic trends. a lot of local businesses and national businesses will use state and local data to conduct market research. So before Walmart opens up a new location, they want to know that there is enough economic activity and enough personal income in that area to support that location. And then finally, our state personal income data are used to allocate federal funds out to the states. And when we say federal funds, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's part of the FMAP formula, which is used to allocate Medicaid funds out to the states. So your state treasurer office and state budget officer is paying very close attention to our state personal income data. So county GDP, as Janine mentioned, this is our newest data product. We released the inaugural data this past December. And what good is it for? Why are we doing this? Well, it can help answer questions like, how big is my local economy? Is the local economy growing or shrinking? And what industries are really driving growth? And one of the reasons why we added this particular data set is that it provides a richer picture of the geographic distribution of the nation's economic activity. As you can imagine, GDP or economic activity is not evenly distributed across all 50 states. And even within each state, economic growth is not evenly distributed. So here is a really good example. Is the darker blue colors are going to be those counties that have had that experienced the fastest economic growth in 2018. And then the lightest colors are those counties that experienced the slowest growth. And as you can see, there's really just a ton of unevenness across the country in terms of economic activity. So this is, what I want to show you here is that GDP by state, as I mentioned, is not sort of evenly distributed. At the very top, we've got Washington state, which grew at a 5.8% rate in 2018. And down at the bottom, we had Delaware, which actually didn't grow at all. But even within these states, there are many counties that had a large GDP increase in those states. So if you look near the bottom, Nebraska was one of the slower growing states, but it had 17 counties with very fast rates of GDP increase. Conversely, Texas was one of the faster growing states, but it had only, but it had 15 counties that had very slow growth. So even within a fast growing or slow growing state, you've got a really uneven distribution of growth inside that state among counties. So GDP by state is, GDP by county is really good, but one thing it's not going to show you is any per capita data. And there's a really good reason for that that I'm going to explain, but I'm going to explain it as part of my introduction to personal income. BEA's personal income data show all of the income that persons receive from all sources. That includes kind of obvious sources like your paycheck. If you own business, the income that you receive from that business, rental property, Social Security and other government benefits, interest and dividends, but also includes some kind of not so obvious sources. And that includes if you receive Medicaid, the money that the government pays to for your healthcare services that you receive, and then also employer-provided supplements like health insurance. One thing that we don't include in personal income is capital gains from, for instance, increase in stock prices. That's because our data are really focused on income from current production, and capital gains are really changes in asset prices. So it's not part of current production. Our county personal income statistics will show the combined income of all people living in a county or parish if you're in Louisiana, including of those residents who work outside of the county. And we have this data available on a per capita basis. So again, just, you know, kind of talking about the how personal income is not evenly distributed across the US. This map is a little bit dated, but I think it still probably holds mostly true. 111 largest counties account for 1/2 of US personal income. So those shaded counties account for 1/2 of all personal income. To dig a little bit more into the question of people who live in one county and work in another, I'm going to use an example of Kara, who lives in Fairfax County, Virginia, but she works across the border in Montgomery County, Maryland. Her commute is probably not very much fun, but we count her GDP where she actually works. So her compensation is going to be counted in Montgomery County, Maryland. On the other hand, her for personal income, we're counting her compensation where she lives, which is in Fairfax County, Virginia. For metro area, both Montgomery County, Maryland and Fairfax County, Virginia are located in the Washington, Arlington, Alexandria, DC, Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia metropolitan statistical area. So it's going to be in the same metro area. But if you look at the state level, again, we've got a divide. GDP, we're counting her compensation in Maryland. For personal income, it's being counted in Virginia. So you're probably at this point wondering, well, which should I use and why? So if you want to understand the local economy, both GDP and personal income are really useful. And they're useful in kind of different ways. If you need data on a per capita basis, you want to use the personal income data. We do not have per capita GDP by county because GDP is really based on not the number of people who live in a county, but it's based on the work that's being performed there, no matter where those workers live. If you need data by place of work, you're going to want to use our GDP data. We do have some compensation data by place of work under the personal income accounts, but really that GDP data is the place you're going to want to go. If you need data by place of residence, the only place to get that is our personal income data. And if you want to understand how much is produced in a county and which industries are producing it, that's going to be GDP. If you want to understand the source of people's income in a county, personal income. So this chart is just going to show you a little bit about the sources of personal income and GDP, why they're kind of different, and where they kind of are the same. And so that's enough just kind of talking. If you have your computer handy, maybe either minimize or shrink the screen share, and we can get started with some hands-on activity. How to access our data. The first thing you're going to want to do is go to bea.gov, which is our website. And then under Tools, click on Interactive Data. And then under Regional Data, click on GDP and Personal Income. Now, the motivation for this is you are digging into county GDP. Your county has traditionally been known as a manufacturing center, but you suspect that in recent years, healthcare has become a bigger driver of economic growth in the county. It seems like the hospital is always hiring, but the mills aren't. Conventional wisdom in your county really has yet to catch up. So, you know, your county's economic development office is really focused on bringing more manufacturing in. You just want to dig into the data to see what's truly driving economic growth in your county. So here's the guidelines for how to do that, how to pull the data. So the first thing you want to do is click on Begin Using the Data. And to pull the county GDP data, go to Gross Domestic County by GDP, by county and GDP. And click on the contributions to percent change. You want to make sure that county is highlighted, and then click on Next Step. And so choose the county that you're most interested in. Just for example, I'll click on Virginia. And let's look at Rockbridge County. And we're going to want to stick with all statistics and table. And for unit of measure, we're going to stick with levels. Then click on Next Step. So I like to choose a number of years. Let's go back at least 3 or 4 years just to get a sense of how much these data move over time. And then click on Next Step. So this is going to show for each of the, for this area, Rockbridge County, which also includes the towns of Buena Vista and Lexington. Both the top line, county GDP growth, along with the contributions to that GDP growth. And as you can see, non-durable goods manufacturing is actually a pretty big driver at contributing 0.13 percentage point out of overall 2.1% growth. But even bigger is the real estate and rental and leasing business, the administrative and support and waste management and remediation services, education and social assistance, and so it looks like healthcare is not really the big driver of growth, but it looks like we've got this real estate rental and leasing that's really driving growth in the county. So as I said, or as James mentioned, that's really going to be a beginning to your reporting, but it's not going to be the end. You can use these data, and then you'll be talking to local sources on the ground who can both put a face on the data, as well as explain in concrete terms what's actually sort of behind it. But the data is a great starting point. How to find our data. So in addition to our website, we are on Instagram. We are USBEA Gov on Instagram. We've got, data viz, infographics, videos. We're also on Twitter, BEA_news for the latest news and announcements from BEA. And then we even do, mini articles like the making of GDP. And then we've got an email subscription service. So if you want to sign up for our media advisories, you can actually go to our website and sign up to receive our media advisories. Finally, here's my contact information. This is going to be online as well. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out by calling us at 301-278-9003 or thomas.dale@bea.gov. Really happy to walk you through pulling the particular data that you need for your reporting. And with that, I will turn it over to James. James?
I'm going to jump in for just 1 second. For those,
Sure.
Thank you, Thomas, for those joining us late. You've been listening to Thomas Dale with the BEA, and now I'm going to throw it to James Medore. He covers the economy for Newsday, and he is going to show us how he uses this data to inform his reporting.
Thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate it. And Thomas, thank you for the excellent presentation. I always learn things when I talk to BEA, and I particularly liked your analysis of when we use GDP data at the county level and when we should use personal income data. That was very helpful. I'd like to talk a little bit about COVID-19 coverage, because as most of us reporters, that's really all we're writing about today. About 2.5 weeks ago, my editor came to me and she said, we want to do a Sunday story. And you see the Sunday story on your screen. And she says to me, I seem to recall that the federal government has county data, and that county data is more than just a number. They actually drill down into the various industries in our economy. Could you look at the data and give me a sense of which industries should we focus on? Which sectors should we focus on for this story? So I remembered, because I'm one of the many economics writers in the country who was absolutely thrilled when BEA was able to introduce county level GDP data. So I spent about an hour on BEA.gov going through the data, familiarizing myself again with the data, and also taking some notes about what the data seemed to be showing. And one bit of advice I have for everyone is, if you're like me, your degree is not in economics. My degree is in 20th century British history. So that doesn't help a whole lot when it comes to looking at GDP data and making sure I'm drawing the correct conclusions. So after I go through the data and I make my cheat sheet of conclusions, I then call Thomas. And we spend some time going through my basic conclusions. Thomas is very helpful. If he doesn't have the answer, he knows who can give me the answer. And I do that before I start any reporting, or before I even talk to my editor, because I want to make sure I'm solid on the numbers. I'm solid on the conclusions. So I write about an economy that is composed of about 3 million people who live east of New York City. But my economy is also influenced by the economy in New York City, because many Long Islanders commute into Manhattan every day for work. So when looking at the BEA data, among the things I see that was helpful to my editors, first of all, before COVID ever hit, the economy on Long Island, and Long Island has 2 counties, one county from 2015 to 2017 had relatively steady growth, and then it contracted between 2017 and 2018. The neighboring county, also steady growth, but between 2017 and 2018, it expanded by the same percentage point that the other county contracted. So we have an interesting situation there that I need to factor in my reporting. The second thing that was very interesting is you look at what industries are driving your economy. Now, when we're writing about COVID-19, we're all doing lots of stories about small businesses, restaurants, retailers, Uber drivers, service type businesses that are really struggling, or they unfortunately have already gone out of business. But are those the drivers of your economy? In the case of Long Island, no, they're not the drivers of the economy. The drivers of the economy are, not a big surprise for anyone who knows about New York, finance, insurance, and real estate is the largest sector by far. The second largest sector, one county, it's schools and hospitals and social assistance programs. In another county, it's government. And finally, the sector professional and business services is also a big part of the overall growth of my community. So what do you do with that information? Well, it doesn't mean that you ignore retail or you ignore the service economy. That should be part of your coverage of COVID-19 because frankly, many of those businesses aren't going to make it. They're going to be victims of this terrible virus. But you don't want to have your coverage be exclusively the small businesses on Main Street. You want it also to be about these sectors that I just mentioned. So I went to my editor, and you're seeing right now on the screen the first Sunday story, and it actually was 3 pages. Tess, you can scroll through the other 2 pages. This coming Sunday, we're actually going to be taking the deep dive into the various sectors that GDP data told us were important. And my editor said to me after I gave her the sector, she said, you know, I'm really glad you looked at this data because we're going to be better informed. Our reporting is going to be better. I would not have thought of all of these sectors to include. So then the next step, not surprisingly, is to find participants in each of those sectors to talk to. Because you don't want to just do a number story. You want to make sure you put a human face on what's going on in the community. So actually, in the past week, my colleagues and I, that's exactly what we've been doing. I have been responsible actually for focusing on finance, insurance, and real estate, or FIRE, and finding people to talk to about what they're seeing in their community right now. How is COVID affecting their business and their sector right now? And then what are they seeing 6 months from now, 4 months from now? The other thing that's really important to do is it's important to see this data in different ways. One way is you're going to produce a story as a reporter, right? And you might be producing more than one story. But it's also can help shape the coverage of your overall media institution. So the numbers can be used in different ways. And I would highly recommend this definitely should be part of your COVID-19 coverage. Your county GDP data can really play a big role here. You just need to spend about an hour with the data, probably off deadline, probably a little bit later than you'd like to be asleep, but it's worth it. It's worth it to spend time with this data because it will inform your coverage, and not just one story, but multiple stories. And then, I can't emphasize this enough, you can't fly solo with this. This data is complicated. You need to talk to someone who understands the data inside and out to make sure that you don't misinterpret the data and draw a conclusion that is false. That's why you need to call Thomas. That's why you need to email Thomas. And I'm not ashamed to tell you, on more than one occasion, Thomas has prevented me from looking very stupid in front of 1.5 million readers. So Thomas, publicly thank you for helping me on all those occasions. Tess, I'd like to go to the story that talks about Suffolk GDP surging. So these are the other types of stories that GDP data is very helpful for. This story is actually just a daily story that came out really the day after the GDP data for 2018 was released. But one of the things that it shows that's really important is when you look at that fever chart, it shows that this data goes back, these estimates go back to 2001. So you have data for your economy for 2001 through 2018. First thing I thought about when I saw that was, I can go back in time. I can now give my readers a real sense of how did the September 11th terrorist attacks affect my economy in my community. I can look at how did the economy recover from September 11th? And then we had the recession, right? The financial crisis of 2007, 8, 9. So you can actually use this data to give readers a much better sense of the ebb and flow of your economy. And one thing that this particular chart shows you is that for years, Nassau County, which is the county closest to New York City, in which 40% of all the people who live in Nassau County work in Manhattan every day, has been the big engine. It's been the driver of Long Island's economy. And one of the things this data shows is the more populous county, Suffolk County, which is to the east, it's the home of the Hamptons, it is now equal to Nassau County and actually surpassed Nassau County in 2018. For my readers, that's a watershed moment. That's not something that they would have known if the BEA had not produced this data. So you have the opportunity to really educate your readers about the community they live in and the economy that they live in. The other thing that is really helpful with GDP data is if you look at various sectors. So for example, on Long Island, we don't think we make anything anymore. We don't think that we're a manufacturing center at all. We used to be very famous for producing fighter jets for Northrop Grumman. That business faded away in the mid-90s. And many Long Islanders believe we don't make anything anymore, that we're a service economy. If I look at the BEA data, what I find is that's not true. That while employment in manufacturing has fallen substantially since 1996, if I look at manufacturing's contribution to the overall economy of Long Island, it's gone from $5 billion a year in 2001 to $8 billion a year in 2018. Now, what do you do with that? Well, that's a great fact, but it's not a great story. The way you make it a great story is you go out and you start talking to factory owners, and you start talking to factory employees, and you find out what's going on in this particular sector of the economy that most people think doesn't exist anymore. So this data from BEA really can make your story so much better, and you can find stories that no one else is finding. And frankly, I work for a newspaper, and newspapers, if we are to survive, have to give you something different than what you're getting from other media. And BEA data is something you can use to do stronger stories, more in-depth stories, stories that are going to get your readers talking, whether they're reading on their phone or on their tablet or they're buying The Dead Tree every day. They're going to buy it, they're going to tune into it, they're going to watch it because you're giving them something they can't get anywhere else. So just a few takeaways, because I know we need to get to questions. I mentioned that it's important to work with BEA. So develop a relationship with BEA. Thomas will have a good sense of what your media outlet's about, what you're interested in. On more than one occasion, Thomas has highlighted for me data that's coming out that would make a great story for my readers. That's because Thomas knows what I'm interested in. Thomas understands that Long Island is 2 counties of about 3 million people. Secondly, think about how you can use this data in a visual and a graphic way. Work with your graphic artists. Work with the computer software folks, the tech folks in your newsroom. How can you make these numbers interactive? How can we have them be really sort of pop out on the website and in the newspaper. Also, it's really important to use this data not only for stories. This can actually help your boss figure out, well, how are we going to do a long-term project? We all have to fill Sunday sections, right, of our newspapers and Monday sections. BEA data works really well for those types of stories. And finally, very important, not just to stop with the data. Go out, use the data to then do better, more informed interviews. Thank you for your attention today, particularly with COVID-19. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm going to turn it over to Jim Nelson for questions from the audience.
Thanks, JT. You know, the one thing, James, I want to just engage you for one little bit on this, and I'll take the reaction from Thomas as well, or Janine. You know, I work for the Journal Sentinel in Milwaukee, and we're part of Gannett, and we have many, many publications in very small markets, 260 some different publications. It would seem to me that this kind of data would work as well as in Long Island as it would in Marathon County or other small parts of my state, Wisconsin. I'm curious, is that a legitimate way of using this data, or are those, especially more sparsely populated counties, is that maybe not so relevant?
So I can just say, before I came to Newsday, I worked for the Watertown Daily Times in New York and the Buffalo News, both of them much smaller places, but their geographic territory is greater. And actually, when I found out about county-wide data from BEA, I called up my former bosses and I said, this really cool thing is happening, folks. This is going to be a great story for you. And sure enough, they are using this data because it's data we've never had before. I think we forget, before BEA came out with county-wide data, we were relying on economic forecasting firms to give us sort of a spitball estimate of the size of our economy. That's not what BEA is doing at all.
Yeah.
And it's so much more credible. And I heard back from both of the publications I used to work for. They are now writing stories on a regular basis. They see early December, in this case, December 9th. Everyone, you need to write down December 9th is the release of the 2019 countywide data. I look at it as an early Christmas present.
Well, James, we know how you feel about wonky stuff like this. Happy holidays early. One other thing I would note is, for maybe we have some participants here who are younger journalists earlier in their careers. This is something that I would encourage you to consider doing as a prep for a new job as a business reporter, or frankly, any reporter in a market that's new to you. Tap into these data sets and drill down and learn about the area you're going to be covering. So that's a couple of observations that I have. Let's go to the chat here and hold on one second. Tess, can you grab the first chat question? I'm having an issue here.
Jim, I can jump in if you want me to. I have them.
Go ahead, JT.
Okay, so our first question actually is to Thomas, and the audience member wants to know, how can we extrapolate these past statistics on injury saturation to figure out how deep the coming recession will be in our local area?
Thank you very much. So one thing that you'll notice when you go through the data on by county, by industry, is that the overall industry composition doesn't change a lot from year to year. So if you're in you look at our data and you figure out that county that finance, insurance, real estate, rental, leasing is works out to about 10% of your local economy every year. Some years it rounds up to 11, some years it rounds down to 9. Probably it's not going to change too much. And if it does, it's probably going to be something that you have seen, you will have evidence of it on the ground. So it can be useful, maybe not for extrapolating, but for certainly figuring out, how relevant is the concern about, retail or food service and accommodation. How relevant is the concern about the impact of COVID-19 on those two sectors to my local economy? Is it a big part of the local economy, or is it a relatively small one? So yeah, I would definitely say that it can be useful.
There's a follow-up question from an audience member about the personal income section of your presentation. And
Yep.
the audience member is wondering, does personal income exclude capital gains? Is that what you said, Thomas? And does that mean it excludes realized capital gains or both realized and unrealized gains?
So personal income, our statistics exclude both realized and unrealized capital gains. So if you own 100 shares of Amazon stock, and you bought it at one price, it's gone up 30%, you sell half of that, the proceeds or the profit from that sale will not be counted in your personal income in our statistics. So it's and the logic behind that is that that's really looks at the increase in asset prices, whereas our statistics are focused on current production. Other forms of property income like dividends or interest or rental income, that's certainly I think that's more tied to the current production of goods and services, whereas capital gains, both realized on the one hand and unrealized on the other, are not included.
We have another question from an audience member. This is something I ask you all the time, Thomas.
Yes.
The audience member wants to know, if we click on each of those categories that you showed in the interactive, will it give us a definition of what is actually included in the category? For example, the audience member is wondering, when I look at real estate, what does it include? Is it what I'm thinking, which is the sale and the purchase of a home, or is it other things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And in our local interactive tables, you can actually click on each of these industry categories to get a definition. So for real estate and rental and leasing, it's going to be establishments that are primarily engaged in renting, leasing, or otherwise allowing the use of intangible and intangible assets, and establishments that provide related services. The major portion of the sector is focused on rent, lease, and of real estate. But there can also be equipment or intangibles like patents and trademarks. Maybe that's not a big part of your local economy, but it could be for some. The sector also includes establishments that are primarily engaged in managing real estate for others, or that are engaged in selling or renting or buying real estate for others, or even appraising real estate. The main components of the sector are the real estate lessors industries, including equity real estate investment trusts, equipment lessors like motor vehicle, computer and consumer goods lessors, and then lessors of non-financial intangible assets, except for copyrighted works.
Great.
Yep.
Great.
Got a
That's terrific. Yes, Jim.
We have I'll call it an old school question for Janine.
I won't take offense.
It's BEA's booklets on the economy, the printed booklets, have been very helpful for me as a journalist and a journalism teacher. Are any of them still available in print, or are they online? Thanks and best wishes.
Yes, we actually have the booklets online, and I'm actually looking now. If we go into our resources, scrolling. If you go into resources and go to the Learning Center, so resources is a blue tab at the top of BEA.gov. You click on the Learning Center and you scroll down, and under BEA in the classroom, there is a We've Got Your Number. So you can get a PDF version of that booklet, and we also have hard copies. We'll let you know that we had updated at the beginning of 2020 in January to include our county GDP number. So we're very excited about that. Thank you, Thomas. There you go. It's like magic. Yeah, and this is really written in a way that you don't need to be an economist and to get a sense as to here are numbers that you can use. Here's why they're important. Here's what they cover or don't cover, and it gives you a real nice top line intro to all the numbers that BEA does produce.
Janine, if I could just add, one thing reporters can do and probably should do is our editors now more than ever before are really inundated. They have so much work to do. So you as a reporter sort of take this on as your responsibility, like get to know what BEA has to offer. And if your editor's like my editor, she has never turned down a story I've suggested that's based on BEA data. Never. But she doesn't have the time to go through the data herself because she's busy moving copy every day, whether it's for the web or for the paper. And so I would say as a reporter, sort of take this on, take ownership of this, because it's good for you as a reporter, but it's also good for your readers. You will be able to give them a better, stronger story than they could get somewhere else.
Absolutely. And I just want to emphasize what James has already said. You have to take, it's a little sweat equity to go in and look at the numbers, but it's well worth it. And so when you do have a little downtime, and I know that's probably like the 12th of never, but try to build it in your schedule somehow to start noodling around, and then definitely call us because we can walk you through and give clarity.
I'll add to that clearly James has these agency and individuals on his speed dial, his Rolodex, and for our participants who maybe haven't made that call, maybe haven't dipped in this data, it can be it can be intimidating. You can feel a little uncomfortable, but that's the beauty of having people who understand our business at the other end of the call. And people like Janine and Thomas who have worked in journalism, who understand what we're trying to do with the data that their agency produces. I think we are out of questions here, so I'm going to, I don't see any other questions here. And in the interest of time, I would like to say thank you to everybody for participating, specifically James Fedor from Newsday, Janine Aversa, and Thomas Dale from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And again, I would like to remind you that this program is going to be available and streamed on the CEBU website. And go bang around on there and you'll find the program of taking the pulse of your county's economy. Finally, I'd like to once again thank the Walter and Carla Goldschmidt Foundation for helping make this program possible. Thank you all for participating, and stay healthy, and thanks again.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.